Commander Wu felt his coffee go cold as he read the alien message for the third time. The words on his screen seemed impossible, but the fear behind them was real. 3 hours ago, this transmission had traveled across the galaxy, carrying the desperate cries of a dying civilization. The bridge of the UDC flagship Inchin buzzed with quiet activity. Officers moved between stations, their faces serious as more reports came in. Outside the viewports, Earth's blue marble hung peacefully in space, unaware that somewhere, far away, entire worlds were burning. Admiral Lieutenant Park called from the communications station, her voice tight with concern. The Galactic Council is begging for help. These harvesters aren't just attacking, they're completely destroying everything. 17 colonies, sir. Millions of lives. Admiral Jin walked slowly to the main display, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. At 62, he had seen 3 wars and countless smaller conflicts. His weathered hands clasped behind his back as he studied the star charts showing the devastation. "What's the council planning to do about it?" Jin asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "They're calling emergency sessions, forming committees, debating response strategies," Park replied. "Current estimate is 6 months to organize a proper joint military task force." Jin's jaw muscles tightened. 6 months. He had read the translations of the alien distress calls. Entire families fleeing their homes. Children crying for parents who would never answer. Cities that had stood for thousands of years, reduced to ash in hours. The tactical displays showed the positions of human fleets across known space, patrol groups near the outer colonies, training squadrons around Mars, the main battle fleet here at Earth. In total, humanity had perhaps 300 warships, ready for immediate deployment. It wasn't much compared to the massive armadas other species maintained, but humans had learned long ago that sometimes the size of your fleet mattered less than how quickly you could use it. "Sir." Commander Wu stepped closer, waiting for orders. Jin turned to face his bridge crew. These men and women had served with him for years. They knew what he was thinking before he said it. "Signal all battle groups across human space," Jin said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Priority Alpha mobilization. Full combat loadout. We launch in 60 hours. The bridge fell completely silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They were about to take humanity's entire military force into unknown space to fight an enemy they had never seen. All to save aliens they had barely known existed. No one questioned the decision. No one asked about the risks or the odds. They were human, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, people were calling for help. "That was enough, Captain." Veltar pressed his forefingered hand against the cracked viewport of the refugee ship Gentle Current. The vessel groaned around him, its hull plates twisted from energy weapon strikes that had barely missed vital systems. Behind him, 300 Zephyrian survivors huddled in the cargo bay, their pale blue skin marked with the soot and fear of their escape. The ship's navigation officer, a young female named Silara, suddenly gasped from her station. "Captain, I'm detecting hyperspace signatures, multiple contacts emerging from jump space." Veltar turned, expecting to see perhaps a small council patrol, maybe 5 or 6 ships if they were lucky. The Galactic Council was known for their careful, measured responses to crisis situations. What appeared instead defied everything he understood about galactic civilization. Ships materialized out of hyperspace like drops of rain in a storm. Sleek destroyers, massive cruisers, and battleships that dwarfed anything the Zephyrians had ever built. The tactical display lit up with contact markers. 50 ships, then 100, then 200. "By the ancestors," Solara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Captain, how many vessels do these humans possess?" Veltar stared at the growing fleet surrounding them. His people had studied human military capabilities when first contact was made 6 months ago, the reports suggested a modest defense force typical of a newly spacefaring species. This was something entirely different. 300 warships. 400. The numbers kept climbing as more ships dropped out of hyperspace. Each vessel bore the distinctive angular design of human engineering, efficient, practical, and somehow aggressive, even at rest. "This is impossible," Veltar muttered. "No species maintains battle fleets this size during peacetime. The resource cost alone would bankrupt most civilizations." The communication system crackled to life with a voice speaking accented but clear galactic standard. "Zephyrian vessel, gentle current. This is Admiral Jin of the Human Defense Fleet. We received your distress call transmitted through Council channels. Where do you need us?" Veltar's throat tightened. In his message to the Council, he had begged for any help they could spare. He hadn't expected anyone to actually come. "Admiral Jin, we are grateful, but our world is lost. The harvesters destroyed our defense grid in hours. Our people are scattered across dozen refugee ships." "Captain," Jin's voice cut through, his despair with surprising gentleness, "your world isn't lost. It's just temporarily occupied. Send us the coordinates. We're going to take it back." Around them, the human fleet began forming into battle formations with a precision that spoke of constant training and preparation. Veltar realized that while other species talked about peace, humans prepared for war, and when someone called for help, they came ready to fight. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system like an iron thunderstorm. 437 ships materialized in perfect formation, their engines still glowing hot from the long jump. The fleet's momentum carried them forward at combat speed, heading directly toward the embattled star system. Council patrol. Ships that had been maintaining a safe perimeter suddenly found themselves scrambling to intercept an armada they had never expected to see. "Unknown human vessels," came the sharp transmission from the lead Council ship. "You are in direct violation of 17 interstellar treaties. Reduce speed immediately and submit to inspection protocols." On the bridge of the Inchin, Lieutenant So looked up from her communication station with raised eyebrows. Her fingers hovered over the response controls as she waited for Admiral Jin's orders. Jin stood at the tactical display, watching the Council ships move to intercept his fleet. His weathered face showed no emotion as he studied their formations. "Tell them we don't have time for paperwork." The massive Thurian dreadnought Righteous Purpose moved to block the human fleet's path. At twice the size of the largest human ship, it was an impressive sight, all flowing curves, an elegant design that spoke of a civilization that valued beauty even in war. "Admiral Jin," came a new voice over the communication channel, speaking with the formal tones of Council authority. "I am Commodore Hexaval of the Thurian Defense Corps. You cannot simply ignore established first contact protocols. There are procedures that must be followed." Jin walked slowly to the communication station, his boots echoing in the tense silence of the bridge. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold finality of winter ice. "Commodore," he said, each word precise and measured, "your people sent out a distress call. My people answered that call. Now you have exactly 30 seconds to either get out of our way or fall in behind us and help. Choose quickly." The human fleet didn't slow down. If anything, the ships seemed to increase speed, their formation tightening as they approached the Council vessels. The Inchin's engines roared louder, and across the fleet, weapons systems hummed to life. For a moment, that felt like eternity. The two fleets raced toward each other. The Council ships held their blocking position while human vessels bore down on them with unwavering determination. Then, at the last possible second, the Thurian ships broke formation and moved aside. We will escort you to the combat zone," Commodore Hexaval announced, his voice carrying a mixture of shock and grudging respect. The human fleet swept past the Council ships like a river of metal and fire, carrying hope toward a dying world. The first Harvester scouts slid out from behind, Kepler 44 to be like deadly shadows against the stars. 6 vessels, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering, sleek angular ships that moved with the cold precision of machines. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly metal that seemed to absorb light, and energy crackled along weapon ports that had never known defeat. On the bridge of the Thurian dreadnought, Commodore HFY watched the enemy ships with growing dread. Standard Council doctrine, he muttered to his tactical officer. Long-range engagement, maintain safe distance, probe for weaknesses. If outnumbered, conduct fighting withdrawal. It was how civilized species fought wars carefully, logically, with minimal risk to valuable ships and trained crews. Captain Ben aboard the human destroyer Busan had never read Council doctrine. Contact, his sensor officer shouted. 6 enemy vessels, moving to intercept. They're powering weapons. Ben studied the tactical display for exactly 3 seconds. The harvester ships were spreading into a classic attack formation, expecting their opponents to engage at maximum range like every other species they had encountered. All ahead flank, Ben barked, his hands gripping the command rail. Ramming. Speed. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Yang, looked up in shock. Sir, that violates every rule of space combat engagement. We should maintain distance, and do it. Ben's voice cut through the bridge like a whip. The Busan and her sister ships suddenly accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. The harvesters, their artificial intelligence programmed to fight rational opponents, immediately began evasive maneuvers. Their tactical computers couldn't process what they were seeing. Enemy ships using themselves as weapons. The lead harvester tried to turn away, but it was too late. The Busan smashed through its hull like a hammer through glass, her reinforced bow tearing deep into the alien ship's core. Sparks and atmosphere erupted from the wound as both vessels tumbled through space, locked together in a deadly embrace. But Ben's crew was already moving. Boarding pods launched from the destroyer's sides, carrying Commander Na's Marines directly into the enemy ship's corridors. Within minutes, the sound of plasma rifle fire and shouting echoed through the harvesters' halls as humans fought with rifles, grenades, and when ammunition ran out, combat knives. On the Thurian bridge, Commodore HFY watched in stunned silence as human ships crashed into their enemies like meteorites. Impossible, he whispered. They're conducting boarding actions during active combat maneuvers. His tactical officer's voice shook with disbelief. Sir, they're not just fighting the enemy ships, they're capturing them. The space around Kepler 442b suddenly erupted into chaos as reality itself seemed to tear apart. Massive dimensional rifts opened like wounds in the fabric of space, each one vomiting forth ships that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lieutenant Tay's hands flew across her sensor controls, her face growing pale as the readings climbed higher and higher. Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy signatures. Hundreds of contacts emerging from I don't even know what to call these rifts. Admiral Jin moved to stand behind her station, watching the tactical display fill with red markers. Each one represented a harvester vessel, and they kept appearing. In waves. Ships the size of cities. Their hulls made from materials that seemed to bend light around them. Weapon arrays that pulsed with energy signatures unlike anything in Council databases. Fleet count, 600 and rising, Tay reported, her voice steady, despite the impossible numbers. 700. 800. Admiral, they're still coming. We're outnumbered 4-1, and that ratio is getting worse. On the bridge of the Thurian dreadnought, Commodore HFY stared at his own sensors in horror. Signal general retreat, he ordered. All Council vessels fall back to minimum safe distance. We need to regroup, call for reinforcements. But the human fleet held its position. Admiral Jin studied the enemy formation with the calm focus of a chess master. Any rational commander would see the hopeless odds and withdraw. Any sane leader would establish defensive positions and wait for backup. Any logical military mind would preserve their forces for a battle they could actually win. Jin was human. Signal the fleet, he announced, his voice carrying across every ship in the armada. Attack formation Delta. All vessels, full power to weapons and engines. He paused for a moment, his weathered hand hovering over the communication switch, knowing that his next words might be the last thing many of his people would ever hear. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent lives. The human battle line suddenly surged forward, engines roaring at maximum output, as 400 ships accelerated directly toward the heart of the massive enemy formation. It was madness. It was suicide. It was absolutely, completely human. Across the fleet, something beautiful began to happen. Voices started singing over the communication channels, old songs from Earth, war chants that had been sung by human warriors for thousands of years, Korean folk songs mixed with Celtic ballads, Japanese battle hymns, blended with African war drums played on ship hulls. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you made humanity angry. The space around Kepler 442 be transformed into a nightmare of fire and metal. Energy beams carved through the darkness like lightning, while ships exploded in brilliant flashes that lit up the planet below. The battle had been raging for 2 hours, and the human fleet was taking devastating losses. The frigate Daegu shuddered as a massive energy blast tore through her forward hull, vaporizing everything from the bridge to the main weapons array. Half the ship simply disappeared in a cloud of superheated metal and plasma. Any other crew would have abandoned ship. Captain Hyun dragged himself to the emergency command station in the aft section, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Around him, his surviving crew worked frantically to keep the dying ship operational, aft weapons still functional. His gunner shouted over the screaming alarms. Reactor core holding at 60%. Hyun gripped the manual firing controls and aimed at the nearest harvester cruiser. Then we keep fighting. The Daegu fired her remaining weapons until her reactor finally went critical, taking a massive enemy ship with her. Aboard the cruiser Olsen, Engineer Me watched her engine readings climb far beyond anything the designers had ever intended. Warning lights flashed red across every panel, and the deck plates vibrated with dangerous harmonics. "Captain, we're pushing way beyond safety limits," she called to the bridge. The engines could explode at any second. Captain Q's voice crackled back through the intercom, steady and determined. "Safety limits are for peacetime. Me, give me everything she's got and then find me 10% more." Me looked at the controls for a moment, then disabled every safety system on the ship. The Olsen leaped forward like a caged animal, finally set free. On the flagship Incheon, Admiral Jin stood before the main tactical display, watching red dots disappear as his ships died. But for every human vessel that went dark, 3 or 4 harvester contacts vanished from the screen. The enemy's perfect formations were dissolving into complete chaos. The humans weren't fighting like any species the harvesters had encountered. Crippled ships became kinetic missiles. Mining equipment was jury-rigged into weapons. Crews fought battles while their hulls were open to space, using emergency suits and sheer determination. "Sir," Commander Wu reported from the communications station, barely containing his excitement. "The heavy cruiser Seoul reports successful boarding of a harvester command ship. Captain Ra sends his compliments and says to tell you, the bigger they are, the more room for explosives." Jin allowed himself a grim smile. The galaxy was learning what humans could do when someone they cared about was in danger. The second wave of human ships dropped out of hyperspace like a swarm of angry hornets, and Admiral Jin realized he was looking at something no military academy had ever taught him to expect. This wasn't a fleet, it was an entire civilization mobilized for war. Merchant vessels limped through space with hastily welded weapon mounts bolted to their cargo holds. Colony ships that had been carrying families to new worlds now bristled with improvised armor and volunteer crews. A massive ore hauler, its hull scarred from decades of asteroid mining, cruised past the flagship with its industrial cutting laser, already glowing white. "This is Captain Ho aboard the mining vessel Iron Mountain," came a gravelly voice over the communication channel. "Heard you boys could use some help cutting through enemy armor. This old laser has carved up asteroids for 30 years. Let's see how it handles alien metal." As Jin watched, the ore hauler approached a harvester battleship and simply began cutting through its hull like it was slicing cheese. The enemy vessel's advanced armor, designed to withstand military-grade weapons, melted away under the focused industrial beam. "Transport captain, you requesting orders?" Another voice called out from a converted passenger liner that had once carried tourists between Earth's colonies. "We've got 3,000 volunteers aboard, teachers, mechanics, farmers, students. They all brought whatever weapons they could find. Where do you want us?" The harvester's artificial intelligence systems began sending confused signals across their fleet. Their tactical algorithms had been programmed to fight organized military forces with predictable strategies and rational command structures. They had no protocols for dealing with an enemy that included luxury yachts, ramming battleships, and hospital ships launching attack shuttles, filled with volunteer doctors carrying plasma rifles. A small pleasure craft called Weekend Warrior somehow managed to disable a harvester cruiser by ramming directly into its bridge section. The pilot, a retired teacher named Min, transmitted a simple message before impact: "For the children of Kepler 442, on the Thurian dreadnought." Commodore Hexaval's tactical officer stared at his sensors in disbelief. "Sir, I'm tracking everything from cargo haulers to personal spacecraft. They're all armed, and they're all attacking." "Commodore," his communications officer whispered, "their entire civilization has mobilized for war." Hexaval watched a human medical ship launch combat shuttles while simultaneously treating wounded survivors. He saw merchant captains ramming ships worth millions of credits into enemy vessels without hesitation. This wasn't just military action. This was an entire species that had collectively decided to fight. "No," Hexaval said quietly, "this is their civilization." The final Harvester command vessel loomed against the stars like a mechanical moon, its surface covered in weapon arrays and dimensional manipulation technology. Admiral Jin watched through the cracked viewport of his flagship as the massive construct began to glow with an eerie blue light. "Admiral," Lieutenant Tay called from her damaged sensor station, "the enemy command ship is charging its dimensional drives. Energy buildup suggests they're preparing for a long-range jump." Jin's blood ran cold. If that ship escaped, it would return with reinforcements that could wipe out every human colony in known space. The Harvesters had learned about humanity. Now they wouldn't underestimate them again. The Ancient shuddered around him, her hull plates groaning as atmosphere leaked through dozens of cracks. Emergency lights flickered, and the deck was slick with coolant from damaged systems. Half his crew was dead or wounded, but the old ship's hyperspace engines still hummed with power. Admiral Lieutenant So said quietly from the communications station, "If we jump at this distance to the enemy ship, the spatial distortion will, double quotes." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know, So," Jin said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked around the bridge at the faces of his surviving crew. Lieutenant Park, barely 22, with a bandage wrapped around her head. Engineer Kim, whose hands shook as he tried to keep the engines stable. Commander Wu, who had served with Jin for 15 years and understood exactly what his admiral was planning. "Signal the fleet," Jin ordered, his voice growing stronger. "Tell them ... double quotes." He paused, studying each face one more time. These young people had followed him across the galaxy to save strangers they had never met. They deserved better than to die so far from home. "Tell them it's been an honor to serve with them." Lieutenant So's hands trembled as she opened the fleet-wide channel. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Jin. The war ends here. The war ends now." The Inchin disappeared into hyperspace in a flash of twisted light and emerged 3 seconds later inside the Harvester command ship's defensive shields. For one brief moment, Jin saw the alien bridge through his viewport, mechanical beings turning toward him in surprise. Then everything became light. The explosion tore through both ships like a miniature star being born. The flash was visible from 3 light-years away, and the shock wave rippled across the entire star system, carrying with it the end of the Harvester threat and the sacrifice of humanity's finest. The silence that followed the Bates explosion was more profound than anything the galaxy had ever known, where moments before space had been filled with the roar of engines and the flash of weapons. Now only debris drifted slowly through the darkness around Kepler-44. To be. Commander Wu stood on the bridge of the damaged cruiser Olsen, now the flagship of what remained of humanity's grand fleet. Through the scarred viewport, he could see the wreckage of hundreds of ships, both human and Harvester, scattered across millions of kilometers, like the remnants of some cosmic graveyard. Of the 437 ships that had answered the alien distress call, fewer than 50 remained operational. The rest had been destroyed, or so badly damaged they would never fly again. But scattered throughout the debris field were the twisted hulks of 800 Harvester vessels. Their threat ended forever. Captain Veltar's refugee ship approached. Slowly, its hull still bearing the scars of its escape from the planet below. The Zephyrian captain requested permission to come aboard, and Wu granted it, despite the Olsen's damaged docking bay. When Veltar stepped onto the human ship, his 4 arms were spread wide in the traditional Zephyrian gesture of ultimate respect and gratitude. Behind him came dozens of other survivors, their pale blue faces streaked with tears as they saw the cost of their salvation. "Commander Wu," Veltar said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I must ask you something that has been troubling my people. Why did your species sacrifice so much for strangers? You had only known of our existence for months. We had no treaties, no alliances, no shared history. Why did Admiral Jin give his life for people he had never met?" Wu looked out at the debris field where so many friends had died, where Admiral Jin's engine had made its final jump, where thousands of humans had chosen duty over survival. "Because someone called for help," he said simply. "Because it was the right thing to do." He met the alien's compound eyes, seeing his own exhaustion reflected there. "Because we're human." 6 months later, when the Galactic Council finally assembled their carefully planned joint task force, they arrived to find only empty space where the Harvester fleet had been, in orbit around Kepler-4, to be. They discovered a small monument built from the salvaged hulls of human ships. The inscription was simple, written in over 100 galactic languages. "Here fell the first human defense fleet. They came when called. They died as they lived, protecting others." The Council's new emergency protocol was equally direct. When facing extinction, call the humans first.